When the World Cup draw was made, most people focused on the opponents. Who got the easy group? Who got the difficult route? But actually, for the 2026 Men's World Cup, there may be another draw that matters, the environmental draw. Because while everyone is talking about heat at this tournament, not every team is going to experience the same version of the World Cup. Some teams will play in hotter conditions than others, some will have to deal with altitude, and others face bigger changes in environmental conditions from one match to the next. And across such a geographically spread tournament, teams also have to manage travel, time zones, and potential thunderstorms or lightning delays. So in this video, I want to take a look at the science behind the 2026 Men's Football World Cup environment, what teams may be doing to prepare, and why some nations may have been dealt a tougher environmental hand than others. And importantly, this isn't about predicting who will win or lose, because football is still football. Obviously, player quality, tactics, decision-making, injuries and squad depth are all still going to matter the most. But at this level, small margins matter. And teams that successfully integrate mitigation strategies for their specific environmental conditions may be able to give themselves an advantage, or at least hold back some of that disadvantage that their draw might have given them. The 2026 FIFA Men's World Cup then will be hosted across the USA, Canada, and Mexico. Now, that alone makes it very different from many previous tournaments, if not all. The host cities then span approximately 4,300 kilometers east to west and 4,000 kilometers north to south. That creates a huge range of environmental conditions. So we're talking about heat, altitude, travel, time zone changes, air pollution, and weather disruption. And while some of those challenges are not new to World Cup, the combination and scale of them at this tournament is particularly unusual. This is why I think the environmental draw is such an interesting lens. Because when we talk about a difficult World Cup draw, we normally mean the opponents. But in 2026, a difficult draw might also mean the locations, the kickoff times, the weather, the travel, and the sequence of conditions that a team faces across the group stage. Here then we have a really interesting manuscript led by Daniel Snape from Leeds Beckett University that looked into this issue. And I should say clearly that this is currently a preprint, so I presume it's currently undergoing the peer review process. But it's a really interesting analysis because rather than only asking which venues are hot, it asks which nations face the biggest environmental challenge based on their actual group stage fixtures. The authors looked at expected wet bulb globe temperature, or WBGT, at kickoff alongside the venue elevation. Now, WBGT is useful because it gives us more than just air temperature. It also incorporates humidity, solar radiation, and wind speed, which are all important for heat stress. And the results showed that the environmental challenge is not evenly distributed. Group E is expected to have the highest wet bulb globe temperatures. Group G has the least thermally stressful draw. Group A has the highest median elevation. Group K has the greatest range in elevation. At a team level, France may face the highest maximum wet bulb globe temperature, and Turkey have the least thermally stressful draw. Uruguay were identified as having the most unfavourable draw when combining both heat and altitude stress. Now, again, that does not mean necessarily that Uruguay are going to lose or Turkey are going to win. That's not what I'm saying. But it does show that the environmental load of this tournament is not the same for every team. That matters because environmental conditions can influence how players perform, how teams recover, and how much stress accumulates across the tournament. So what can teams do about it? Now, let's start with heat because that is obviously the headline challenge in this tournament. It's a review article on evidence-based guidelines led by Chris Esch, which is part of sports medicine's competing at the 2026 FIFA World Cup collection. States that extreme heat is expected in 14 of the 16 host cities, with historical maximum wet bulb globe temperatures ranging from 21 to 35 degrees Celsius. FIFA also reports that 56% of venues may exceed FIFA Pro's recommended threshold for delay or postponement of the game. 25% may exceed FIFA's previous 32-degree wet bulb globe temperature threshold for cooling breaks, and 44% may exceed the American College of Sports Medicine cancellation limit for non-heat acclimatized individuals. Of course, those numbers are striking, but it's not just about making the players uncomfortable, of course. That level of heat changes the physiological and performance demands of the game. In hot conditions, players experience greater thermal strain. Core temperature, skin temperature, and muscle temperature, of course, can all increase. And the cardiovascular system has to work harder to support both exercise and also heat dissipation. From a football perspective, one of the most interesting findings is that this level of heat can change match behavior. Reductions in match intensity in hotter conditions, including reductions in high-speed running and high-intensity match actions. So heat doesn't just make players feel tired, it can actually change the way that football is played. Teams may pace themselves differently, whether that is consciously or subconsciously. There might be less high-speed running, more lower-speed movement, and there's also changes in passing behavior, possession, and tactical strategy. And on top of the physical effects, then, heat stress can also affect cognitive performance and decision-making. So the question for the performance staff is not simply how do we keep our players cool? It is how do we protect the physical, technical, and cognitive qualities that allow our players to perform to their best. And this is where their preparation comes in. The first major strategy is heat acclimatization. In simple terms, this means exposing athletes to heat in a planned way so that their body can adapt before competition. Some of the key adaptations then include an expansion in plasma volume, improved cardiovascular stability, earlier onset of sweating, increased sweat rate, a lower heart rate for a given workload, and improved thermal comfort. So the athlete isn't just getting used to the heat psychologically. There are meaningful physiological changes that can reduce strain and improve tolerance. Ideally, teams would have enough time for a longer heat adaptation period, but of course, in tournament football, that is always complicated. Players are coming from their club seasons, and some might have been involved in late domestic or European fixtures, particularly, of course, those from Arsenal and PSG who played in the Champions League final in Europe. Some players as well might already arrive with fatigue, with injury issues, or very different recent environmental exposure. So national teams have to balance heat preparation against the actual football preparation, the recovery, the tactical work, and the status the players are arriving in. And that's why we see a combination of strategies. Some teams have used training camps in relevant environments. England, for example, have already spent time training in the US. And in addition, players were encouraged by their manager to spend their time even earlier in their summer holidays immediately before meeting up in North America to begin adapting even earlier. Whereas some teams, such as France, are only now just heading to North America on the eve of the tournament, but that's not to say they haven't been doing heat acclimation training. Here you can see this passive heat acclimation practice, which can use either post-exercise sauna approach or hot water immersion, as well as potentially a heat chamber that they may have at their national facility in Clairefontaine. As well as the long-term strategies, whole array of short-term mitigations that are used in and around training and game day as well. Hydration monitoring will no doubt be a big emphasis for these teams, and we can do that by either measuring the body mass pre and post training, as well as tracking urine color or urine specific gravity to monitor the athlete's hydration status. During matches then, they have a mixture of different strategies that they can use. We know that there are going to be additional hydration breaks in the games in this tournament of a 3-minute cooling period in the middle of each half. But also keep a lookout during this time for teams making use of ice towels, of cold fluids and drinking ice slushies. They may be using cooling vests as well and other practical interventions to try and help lower the core temperature of the athletes. One of the more interesting examples reported in this case with the England camp has been the use of palm cooling technology. Here you can see Therabody's new cryotherm palm, which I believe is the device being used by England at this World Cup. The theory behind this is that the palms contain specialized vascular structures that can support heat exchange. So by cooling the palms, you may be able to help remove heat as well from the body. The idea is biologically plausible and it has gained interest in elite sport. And in this press release, Therabody have detailed 2 control studies that they've conducted. One with Division I athletes at the University of Southern California, focused on strength training, and a second with elite soccer players at IMG Academy, performing repeated sprint efforts, with improved outcomes in the trials with their palm cooling technology. Of course, this is new technology and very early days in terms of the evidence base. The key point here then is that no single strategy solves the problem. It is the integration of all these different approaches and tools that matter. The next challenge then is altitude. Altitude won't affect every team in the same way as heat, but for the teams exposed to it, it will still matter greatly. Matches in Mexico City and Guadalajara will be played at moderate altitude, with Mexico City around 2,240 meters, and Guadalajara around 1,566 meters above sea level. At these altitudes, the issue is reduced oxygen availability. So that can affect aerobic metabolism, repeated sprint ability, recovery between high intensity effort, and possibly as well aspects of cognitive function and decision making. For football then that matters because performance is not just one continuous endurance effort, it's repeated bursts of high intensity activity, of course accelerations, decelerations, sprinting, pressing, recovering, and making decisions and executing skills under pressure. If recovery between those high-intensity efforts is compromised, it may influence how aggressively a team can press, how often players can repeat runs, and how they just manage the tempo of the game. Again, that doesn't just mean that altitude will decide the result, but it adds another layer. Some teams will play at altitude, some won't. Some players may have prior exposure through their domestic clubs, whereas others might arrive with very little recent exposure to such altitude. If you're in Mexico, playing in Mexico with players who already have greater familiarity with altitude, then perhaps that's a very different scenario to a team arriving from sea level with limited preparation time. So that's why both team-specific preparation and individual athlete-specific preparation matters. The same generic plan will not fit every environmental draw. Then there is, of course, travel. The match is only part of the load. The travel, recovery, and preparation between matches in such short periods of time as well can become just as important. And in this tournament, teams may have to travel larger distances, go into different climates, and cross different time zones. In that sports medicine collection, then they highlight that some players may have to cross up to 19 time zones just to reach the team base camps before the tournament. And then in the tournament, Travel may involve up to 3 time zone changes and flights of up to 7 hours between games. Now, that can affect sleep, circadian rhythms, hydration, nutrition, recovery, mood, readiness, and training quality. And because World Cup matches are played every few days, teams don't have unlimited time to address those issues. So the logistics, the travel planning becomes performance planning. When do you fly? When do players sleep? When do they train? When should you get light exposure? How do you manage your meal timings? How do you support hydration? And how do you reduce that stress associated with travel? It's not so much about jet lag, although there could be some by changing across 3 time zones. But certainly the travel fatigue will be a major component at this tournament. So the best teams aren't just thinking about what happens on the pitch, they're thinking about how to create the conditions that allow players to be ready to be at their best when they arrive there. Another environmental challenge I think worth mentioning briefly is the risk of thunderstorms and lightning. So obviously this isn't the same type of physiological stressor as heat or altitude, but it's a very real disruption challenge. In North America, lightning protocols are strict. If lightning is detected within a certain radius, then matches may be suspended, players are taken off the pitch, fans are taken from the stands into the arena, and play won't restart until conditions are considered safe. We've already seen weather delays in preparation matches. From a performance perspective, the interesting question is not simply whether lightning is dangerous, because of course it is. The more interesting question for those staff is what happens if a World Cup match is stopped for 30, 45 or 60 minutes? Muscle temperatures will fall, hydration and fueling plans may be disruptive, players may become mentally flat or conversely overly activated in that time period. And coaches might be trying to manage tactical inflammation without overloading the players. Then, when the match restarts, the players need to return to high intensity performance almost immediately. This is where re-warm-up strategies become important. Teams might need plans for different delay lengths. A short delay might require one approach. A longer delay may need more structured re-warm-ups, perhaps more mobility and activation. But the biggest challenge then, of course, is that uncertainty. So again, the theme here is adaptation. The teams that are planned for these scenarios may be better able to manage the disruption if and when it happens. So will any of this actually matter? Of course, I think this is where I need to be careful. The environment itself is not going to win or lose the World Cup. The best teams, the best players, the best tactical decisions will hopefully still be the biggest factors. But the environmental stress can influence the conditions under which qualities are expressed on the pitch. If 2 teams are evenly matched and one is better adapted to the heat, better prepared for travel, more familiar with altitude, or better able to handle a long weather delay, that might matter. The teams that successfully integrate mitigation strategies relating to their specific environmental conditions may be able to give themselves that advantage, or at least claw back some of the disadvantage that draw has given them. That's what I'm going to be watching for, not just the ball, not just who plays, but how these teams manage heat, altitude, travel, disruption, and recovery across the tournament. The 2026 Men's World Cup is not just this test of football quality, it's also a test of preparation, adaptability, and environmental management. Now, if you enjoyed this breakdown and want more content on the science behind sports performance, then please like and subscribe to Global Performance Insights.